The United States Marshals Service is a U.S. federal law enforcement agency within the U.S. Department of Justice. The Office of U.S. Marshals is the oldest American federal law enforcement office. The U.S. Marshal's Office was created by the Judiciary Act of 1789. It assumed its current name in 1969. The Marshal's Service is part of the executive branch of government, and is the enforcement arm of the U.S. federal courts. The U.S. Marshals are the primary agency for fugitive operations. U.S. Marshals are also responsible for the protection of officers of the court, court buildings and the effective operation of the judiciary. The service also assists with court security, prisoner transport, and serves federal arrest warrants. History, origins. The Office of United States Marshal was created by the Judiciary Act on September 24, 1789. The Act specifically determined that the U.S. Marshal's primary function was to execute all lawful warrants issued to him and under the authority of the United States. It defined marshals as officers of the courts charged with assisting federal courts in their law enforcement functions. The text of Section 27 of the Judiciary Act reads, "And be it further enacted, that a marshal shall be appointed in and for each district for a term of 4 years, but shall be removable from office at pleasure, whose duty it shall be to attend the district and circuit courts when sitting therein, and also the Supreme Court in the district in which that court shall sit. And to execute throughout the district, all lawful precepts directed to him, and issued under the authority of the United States, and he shall have the power to command all necessary assistance in the execution of his duty, and to appoint as shall be occasion, one or more deputies." The Marshal's Service itself, as a federal agency, was not created until 1969. It succeeded the Executive Office for United States Marshals, itself created in 1965 as the first organization to supervise U.S. Marshals nationwide. In a letter to Edmund Randolph, the first United States Attorney General, President George Washington wrote, "Impressed with the conviction that the due administration of justice is the firmest pillar of good government, I have considered the first arrangement of the judicial department as essential to the happiness of our country, and to the stability of its political system. Hence the selection of the fittest characters to expound the law, and dispense justice, has been an invariable object of my anxious concern." Many of the first U.S. Marshals had already proven themselves in military service during the American Revolution. Among the first marshals were John Adams's son-in-law Congressman William Stevens Smith for the District of New York, another New York District Marshal, Congressman Thomas Morris, and Henry Dearborn for the District of Maine. From the nation's earliest days, marshals were permitted to recruit special deputies as local hires or as temporary transfers to the Marshal's Service from other federal law enforcement agencies. Marshals were also authorized to swear in a posse to assist with manhunts and other duties ad hoc. Marshals were given extensive authority to support the federal courts within their judicial districts, and to carry out all lawful orders issued by federal judges, Congress, or the President. The marshals and their deputies served writs, and other process issued by the courts, made all the arrests, and handled all federal prisoners. They also disbursed funds as ordered by the courts. Marshals paid the fees and expenses of the court clerks, U.S. attorneys, jurors, and witnesses. They rented the courtrooms and jail space and hired the bailiffs, criers, and janitors. They made sure the prisoners were present, the jurors were available, and that the witnesses were on time. When President George Washington set up his first administration, and the first Congress began passing laws, both quickly discovered an inconvenient gap in the constitutional design of the government. It had no provision for a regional administrative structure stretching throughout the country. Both the Congress and the executive branch were housed at the national capital. No agency was established or designated to represent the federal government's interest at other localities. The need for a regional organization quickly became apparent. Congress and the President solved part of the problem by creating specialized agencies, such as customs and revenue collectors, to levy tariffs and taxes, yet there were numerous other jobs that needed to be done. The only officers available to do them were the marshals and their deputies. The marshals thus provided local representation for the federal government within their districts. They took the national census every decade through 1870. They distributed presidential proclamations, collected a variety of statistical information on commerce and manufacturing, supplied the names of government employees for the National Register, and performed other routine tasks needed for the central government to function effectively. Enforcement roles: U.S. territory. During the settlement of the American West, marshals often served as the main source of day-to-day law enforcement in various parts of the West that had no local government of their own. Wyatt Earp, Bat Masterson, and Dallas Staudenmeier are examples of well-known marshals. In modern times, Congress, the President, and governors have called on the marshals for over 200 years to carry out unusual or extraordinary missions, such as registering enemy aliens in wartime, sealing the American border against armed expeditions from foreign countries, and, at times during the Cold War, swapping spies with the Soviet Union, and also retrieving North Carolina's copy of the Bill of Rights. Individual deputy marshals, particularly in the American West, have been seen as legendary heroes in the face of rampant lawlessness. Marshals arrested the infamous Dalton Gang in 1893, helped suppress the Pullman Strike in 1894, enforced prohibition during the 1920s, and have protected American athletes at recent Olympic Games. Marshals protected the refugee boy Elian Gonzalez before his return to Cuba in 2000, and have protected abortion clinics as required by federal law. The Marshals Service has been responsible for law enforcement among U.S. personnel in Antarctica since 1989. One of the more onerous jobs the Marshals were tasked with was the recovery of fugitive slaves, as required by the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. They were also permitted to form a posse and to deputize any person in any community to aid in the recapture of fugitive slaves. Failure to cooperate with the marshal resulted in a $5,000 fine and imprisonment, a significant penalty in those days. The Oberlin-Wellington Rescue was a celebrated fugitive slave case involving U.S. Marshals. James Batchelder was the second marshal killed in the line of duty. Batchelder, along with others, was preventing the rescue of fugitive slave Anthony Burns in Boston in 1854. The marshals were on the front lines of the civil rights movement in the 1960s, mainly providing protection to volunteers. In September 1962, President John F. Kennedy ordered 127 marshals to accompany James Meredith, an African American who wished to register at the segregated University of Mississippi. Their presence on campus provoked riots at the university, requiring President Kennedy to federalize the Mississippi National Guard to pacify the crowd, but the marshals stood their ground, and Meredith registered. Marshals provided continuous protection to Meredith during his first year at Ole Miss, and Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy later proudly displayed a deputy marshal's dented helmet in his office. U.S. Marshals also protected black schoolchildren integrating public schools in the South. Artist Norman Rockwell's famous painting The Problem We All Live With depicted a tiny Ruby Bridges being escorted by 4 towering U.S. Marshals in 1964. Except for suits by incarcerated persons, non-prisoner litigants proceeding in former Pope eras, or by seamen, U.S. Marshals no longer serve process in private civil actions filed in the U.S. District Courts. Under the federal rules of civil procedure, process may be served by any U.S. citizen over the age of 18 who is not a party involved in the case. Duties: the Marshals Service is responsible for apprehending wanted fugitives, providing protection for the federal judiciary, transporting federal prisoners, protecting endangered federal witnesses, and managing assets seized from criminal enterprises. The Marshals Service is responsible for 55.2% of arrests of federal fugitives. Between 1981 and 1985, the Marshals Service conducted fugitive investigative strike team operations to jumpstart fugitive capture in specific districts. In 2012, U.S. Marshals captured over 36,000 federal fugitives and cleared over 39,000 fugitive warrants. The United States Marshals Service also executes all lawful writs, processes, and orders issued under the authority of the United States, and shall command all necessary assistance to execute its duties. U.S. Marshals also have the common law-based power to enlist any willing civilians as deputies. In the Old West this was known as forming a posse, although under the Posse Comitatus Act, they cannot use troops for law enforcement duties while in uniform representing their unit, or the military service. However, if serviceman-woman is off-duty, wearing civilian clothing, and willing to assist a law enforcement officer on his/her own behalf, it is acceptable. Lastly, Title 28 U.S.C. Chapter 37 Section 564 authorizes United States Marshals, Deputy Marshals and such other officials of the service as may be designated by the Director, in executing the laws of the United States within a state, to exercise the same powers which a sheriff of the state may exercise in executing the laws thereof. Organization. The United States Marshals Service is based in Arlington, Virginia, and, under the authority and direction of the Attorney General, is headed by a director, who is assisted by a deputy director. USMS headquarters provides command, control, and cooperation for the disparate elements of the service. Headquarters, Director of the U.S. Marshals Service, Stacia Hilton, Deputy Director of the U.S. Marshals Service, Chief of Staff, Equal Employment Opportunity, Office of Public Affairs, Office of Congressional Affairs, Office of Internal Communications, Office of General Counsel, Office of Inspection, Administration Directorate, Training Division, Human Resources Division, Information Technology Division, Management Support Division, Financial Services Division, Asset Forfeiture Division. Operations Directorate, Judicial Security Division, Investigative Operations Division, Witness Security Division, Justice Prisoner and Alien Transportation System, Tactical Operations Division, Special Operations Group. Prisoner Operations Division. Districts. The U.S. court system is divided into 94 federal judicial districts, each with a district court. For each district there is a presidentially appointed and Senate-confirmed United States Marshal, a Chief Deputy U.S. Marshal in certain larger districts, Supervisory Deputy U.S. Marshals, and as many Deputy U.S. Marshals and Special Deputy U.S. Marshals as needed. In the United States federal budget for 2005, funds for 3,067 deputy marshals and criminal investigators were provided. The U.S. Marshal for United States Courts of Appeals is the U.S. Marshal in whose district that court is physically located. The Director and each United States Marshal are appointed by the President of the United States and subject to confirmation by the United States Senate. The District U.S. Marshal is traditionally appointed from a list of qualified law enforcement personnel for the district or state. Each state has at least one district, while several larger states have 3 or more. Deputy U.S. Marshals. Training and job duties. U.S. Marshals Service hiring is competitive and comparable to the selection process for special agent positions in sister agencies. Typically less than 5% of qualified applicants are hired and must possess at a minimum a 4-year bachelor degree or competitive work experience. While the USMS's hiring process is not entirely in the public domain, applicants must pass a written test, an oral board interview, an extensive background investigation, a medical examination and drug test, and multiple fitness in total exams to be selected for training. Deputy U.S. Marshals complete a 19-week training program at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia. Deputy U.S. Marshals start their careers as 0082 Basic Deputy U.S. Marshals at the GS-7 pay grade. After the first year and grade, they are promoted to GS-9, the following year GS-11, and finally Journeyman GS-12. Once deputies reach the GS-11 pay grade, they are reclassified as 1811 criminal investigators. Criminal investigators work additional hours and receive an additional 25% law enforcement availability pay on top of their base pay. Deputies perform criminal investigations, execute warrants, and other investigative operations. They also protect government officials, process seized assets of crime rings for investigative agencies, and relocate and arrange new identities for federal witnesses in the United States Federal Witness Protection Program, which is headed by the USMS. After Congress passed the Adam Walsh Act, The U.S. Marshals Service was chosen to head the new Federal Sex Offender Tracking and Prosecution Hot Team. Titles: Director of the United States Marshals Service, originally titled the Chief United States Marshal, top executive of the entire U.S. Marshals Service, United States Marshal, for the top executive Marshal Service position in a federal judicial district, Chief Deputy United States Marshal, the senior career manager for the federal judicial district who is responsible for management of the Marshal's office and staff, Supervisory Deputy United States Marshal, for positions in the Marshal's Service responsible for the supervision of 3 or more Deputy U.S. Marshals and clerks, Deputy United States Marshal, for all non-supervisory positions classifiable to this series, Inspector. This title was created for promotions within the service, usually for senior non-supervisory personnel. Senior Deputy U.S. Marshals assigned to the Witness Protection Program are given the title Inspector. Senior DUSMs assigned to regional fugitive task forces or working in special assignments requiring highly skilled criminal investigators often receive the title Inspector. Deputy Marshals assigned to the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Department within the USMS also hold the title of Senior Inspector. Inspectors receive a GS-13 pay grade level. The titles of Senior Inspector and Chief Inspector are also sometimes used in the service for certain assignments and positions within the agency. Special Deputy U.S. Marshals. The Director of the Marshal Service is authorized by 28 U.S.C. AA millisecond 561, d, authorizing Director of Marshal Service to appoint such employees as are necessary to carry out the powers and duties of the service, to deputize the following individuals to perform the functions of deputy marshals, selected officers or employees of the Department of Justice. Federal, state or local law enforcement officers. Members of the United States Coast Guard. When appropriate, private security personnel to provide courtroom security for the federal judiciary and other persons designated by the Associate Attorney General. Court security officers. Court security officers are contracted former law enforcement officers who receive limited deputations as armed special deputy marshals and play a role in courthouse security. Using security screening systems, CSOs attempt to detect and intercept weapons and other prohibited items that individuals attempt to bring into federal courthouses. There are more than 4,700 CSOs with certified law enforcement experience deployed at more than 400 federal court facilities in the United States and its territories. Detention Enforcement Officer, DEOs are responsible for the care of prisoners in USMS custody. They also are tasked with the responsibility of conducting administrative remedies for the U.S. Marshal. DEOs can be seen transporting, booking and securing federal prisoners while in USMS custody. They also provide courtroom safety and cell block security. Detention enforcement officers are deputized and fully commissioned federal law enforcement officers by the U.S. Marshal. They are authorized to carry firearms and conduct all official business on behalf of the agency. Not all districts employ detention enforcement officers. Specialized units. Special Operations Group. The Special Operations Group is a specially trained and highly disciplined tactical unit of the U.S. Marshals Service. It is a self-supporting response team capable of responding to emergencies anywhere in the United States or its territories. Most of the deputy marshals who have volunteered to be SOG members serve as full-time deputies in Marshals Service offices throughout the nation, and they remain on call 24 hours a day for SOG missions. The SOG also maintains a small, full-time operational cadre stationed at the Marshals Service Tactical Operations Center at Camp Beauregard, Louisiana. There, all SOG deputies undergo extensive, specialized training in tactics and weaponry. These deputies must meet rigorous physical and mental standards. The group's missions include apprehending fugitives, protecting dignitaries, providing court security, transporting high-profile and dangerous prisoners, providing witness security, and seizing assets. Members of the U.S. Marshal SOG teams are armed with M1911A1 Springfield Pro Rail pistol. Marshals are also equipped with AR-15s and 12-gauge Remington 870 shotguns. As a less-than-lethal option, marshals are armed with the ASP batons and OC pepper sprays. Firearms. The primary handgun for marshals is the Glock pistols in .40s and W caliber, and each deputy may carry a backup handgun of their choice if it meets certain requirements. Line of duty deaths. More than 200 U.S. Marshals, Deputy Marshals, and Special Deputy Marshals have been slain in the line of duty since Marshal Robert Forsyth was shot dead by an intended recipient of court papers in Augusta, Georgia, on January 11, 1794. He was the first U.S. government law officer killed in the line of duty. The dead are remembered on an honor roll permanently displayed at headquarters. Scandals. On March 26, 2009, the body of Deputy U.S. Marshal Vincent Bustamante was discovered in Juarez, Mexico, according to the U.S. Marshals Service. Bustamante, who was accused of stealing and pawning government property, was a fugitive from the law at the time of his death. Chihuahua State Police said the body had multiple wounds to the head, apparently consistent with an execution-style shooting. In January 2007, Deputy U.S. Marshal John Thomas Ambrose was charged with theft of Justice Department property, disclosure of confidential information, and lying to federal agents during an investigation. Deputy Ambrose had been in charge of protecting mobster-turned-informant Nicholas Calabres, who was instrumental in sending 3 mob bosses to prison for life. A federal jury convicted Ambrose on April 27, 2009, of leaking secret government information concerning Calabres to William Guide, a family friend and former Chicago police officer who had also served time in prison for corruption. Ambrose also was convicted of theft of government property but acquitted of lying to federal agents. On October 27, 2009, Ambrose was sentenced to serve 4 years in prison. Racial discrimination. In 1998, retired Chief Deputy U.S. Marshal Matthew Fogg won a landmark EEO and Title VII racial discrimination and retaliation lawsuit against the Justice Department, for which he was awarded $4 million. The jury found the entire Marshals Service to be a racially hostile environment, which discriminates against blacks in its promotion practices. U.S. District Judge Thomas Penfield Jackson summarized the jurors' decision by stating that they felt there was an atmosphere of racial disharmony and mistrust within the United States Marshals Service. As of 2011, Fogg is president of Bigots with Badges, and executive director of CARL, and is also associated with Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, a drug law reform organization of law enforcement officers. Criticism. The USMS played a critical role in Ruby Ridge. On August 21, 1992, 6 marshals were sent to scout the area to determine suitable places away from the cabin to arrest Weaver. The marshals, dressed in camouflage, were equipped with night vision goggles and M16 rifles. DUSM's Art Roderick, Larry Cooper and Bill Degan formed the reconnaissance team, while DUSM's David Hunt, Joseph Thomas and Frank Norris formed an observation post team on the ridge north of the cabin. At one point, Roderick threw 2 rocks at the Weaver cabin to test the reaction of the dogs. 32, the dogs became alerted, and Weaver's friend Kevin Harris, and Weaver's 14-year-old son, Samuel, emerged and followed the dog striker to investigate. Harris and the younger Weaver were hoping that the dog had noticed a game animal since the cabin was out of meat. 33, Sammy Weaver told his father he believed the dogs had sensed either a large animal or a man in the woods. The recon team marshals initially retreated through the woods and radio contact with the OP team, but later took up hidden defensive positions. Later the OP team marshals and the Weavers both claimed the Weaver dogs were alerted to the recon team marshals in the woods after neighbors at the foot of the mountains started their pickup truck. The recon team marshals retreated through the woods to the Y juncture in the trails 500 yards west of the cabin, out of sight of the cabin. Sammy and Harris followed the dog striker on foot through the woods while Randy, also on foot, took a separate logging trail. Vicky, Sarah, Rachel, and baby Elisheba remained at the cabin, at first appearing anxious to the OP team, but later appearing relaxed. Randy encountered the marshals at the Y. Roderick claimed to have yelled, "Back off!" U.S. Marshal. Upon sighting Weaver, and Cooper said he had shouted, "Stop!" U.S. Marshal. Later statements by Roderick, Cooper and Randy agreed that Randy responded by cursing and retreating from the marshals. About a minute later the dog and the boys came out of the woods and a firefight erupted between the marshals and Sammy and Harris. Accounts differ at this point as to who first opened fire but agree that DUSM Roderick shot and killed Weaver's dog and that Samuel Weaver returned fire at Roderick. After the federal agents began firing, 14-year-old Samuel Weaver was shot in the back while retreating, and DUSM Degan was shot and killed by Harris. An audit by the Office of Inspector General of the Justice Department found weaknesses in the USMS's efforts to secure federal court facilities in the 6 USMS district offices we visited. The report found, among other things, that the USMS Judicial Security Division had contracted private security firms to provide CSOs without having completed background checks. Another incident involved the USMS awarding a $300 million contract to a firm that had a known history of numerous criminal activities leading to convictions for mail fraud and bank fraud and false insurance claims in addition to a civil judgment against its chief financial officer. Technical problems included CSOs not being properly trained on security screening equipment, which also meant equipment not being used. The OIG noted that in February 2009, several courthouses failed to detect mock explosives sent by USMS headquarters in order to test security procedures. They also found that 18% of CSOs had outdated firearms qualifications. Notable marshals: Jesse D. Bright, U.S. Marshal for Indiana. Later served as U.S. Senator for that state. Seth Bullock, businessman, rancher, sheriff for Montana, sheriff of Deadwood, South Dakota, U.S. Marshal of South Dakota. John F. Clark, U.S. Marshals Service Director and U.S. Marshal for the Eastern District of Virginia. Charles Francis Colcord, rancher, businessman and marshal for Oklahoma. Phoebe Cousins, lawyer, first woman appointed to the U.S. Marshals. Henry Dearborn, marshal for the District of Maine. Frederick Douglass, former slave and noted abolitionist leader, appointed U.S. Marshal for the District of Columbia in 1877, Morgan Earp, Deputy U.S. Marshal, Tombstone, Arizona, appointed by his brother Wyatt. Virgil Earp, Deputy U.S. Marshal, Tombstone, Arizona, Wyatt Earp, Deputy U.S. Marshal, Frank Eaton, Deputy U.S. Marshal for Judge Isaac C. Parker, author, cowboy, scout, Indian fighter, and mascot for Oklahoma State University. Richard Griffith, Brigadier General in the Confederacy during the Civil War. Wild Bill Hickok, noted Western lawman, who served as a Deputy U.S. Marshal at Fort Riley, Kansas in 1867–1869. Bass Reeves is thought by most to be one of the first black men to receive a commission as a U.S. Deputy Marshal west of the Mississippi River. Before he retired from federal service in 1907, Reeves had arrested over 3,000 felons. Ward Hill Lamon, friend, law partner and frequent bodyguard of President Abraham Lincoln, who appointed him U.S. Marshal for the District of Columbia. J.J. McAllister, U.S. Marshal for Indian Territory, Confederate Army captain, merchantman and founder of McAllister, Oklahoma as well as the developer of the coal mining industry in eastern Oklahoma, one of 3 members of the first Oklahoma Corporation Commission and the second Lieutenant Governor of Oklahoma. Benjamin McCulloch, U.S. Marshal for Eastern District of Texas. Became a brigadier general in the Army of the Confederate States during the American Civil War. Henry Eustace McCulloch, U.S. Marshal for Eastern District of Texas. Brother of Benjamin McCulloch. Also a Confederate general, James J.P. McShane, appointed U.S. Marshal for the District of Columbia by President John F. Kennedy, then named Chief Marshal in 1962. John W. Marshall, U.S. Marshal for the Eastern District of Virginia, first African-American to serve as Director of the U.S. Marshals Service. Bat Masterson, noted Western lawman. Deputy to U.S. Marshal for Southern District of New York, appointed by Theodore Roosevelt. Joseph Meek, Territorial Marshal for Oregon. Thomas Morris, Marshal for New York District. David Nagel, shot Chief Justice of California David S. Terry to protect U.S. Supreme Court Justice Stephen Johnson Field, resulting in U.S. Supreme Court decision in re Nagel. Henry Massey Rector, Marshal for Arkansas. later governor of that state, Porter Rockwell, deputy marshal for Utah, William Stevens Smith, 1789 U.S. Marshal for New York District and son-in-law of President John Adams, Dallas Staudenmeier, successful city marshal who tamed and controlled a remote, wild and violent town of El Paso, Texas. Became U.S. Marshal serving West Texas and New Mexico Territory just before his death. Heck Thomas, Bill Tillman, and Chris Madsen, the legendarily fearless three guardsmen of the Oklahoma Territory, Cal Whitson, one-eyed deputy marshal for the Oklahoma Territory. Rooster Cogburn of the novel and film True Grit is largely based on Whitson. William F. Wheeler, marshal for the Montana Territory, James E. Williams, marshal for South Carolina, Medal of Honor recipient, Fugitive Programs, 15 Most Wanted. The Marshals Service publicizes the names of wanted persons it places on the list of U.S. Marshals' 15 Most Wanted Fugitives, which is similar to and sometimes overlaps the FBI 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list or the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives Most Wanted list, depending on jurisdiction. The 15 Most Wanted Fugitive Program was established in 1983 in an effort to prioritize the investigation and apprehension of high-profile offenders who are considered to be some of the country's most dangerous fugitives. These offenders tend to be career criminals with histories of violence or whose instant offense, pose a significant threat to public safety. Current and past fugitives in this program include murderers, sex offenders, major drug kingpins, organized crime figures, and individuals wanted for high-profile financial crimes. Major cases. The Major Case Fugitive Program was established in 1985 in an effort to supplement the successful 15 Most Wanted Fugitive Program. Much like the 15 Most Wanted Fugitive Program, the Major Case Fugitive Program prioritizes the investigation and apprehension of high-profile offenders who are considered to be some of the country's most dangerous individuals. All escapes from custody are automatically elevated to major case status. See also, List of fictional U.S. Marshals, references. External links, Court Security Programme includes role in CSOs, authority of FBI agents, serving as Special Deputy United States Marshals, to pursue non-federal fugitives, deputization of members of Congress as Special Deputy U.S. Marshals, U.S.C. on the U.S. Marshals Service, Retired U.S. Marshals Association, U.S. Diplomatic Security Service, Stacia Hilton Director of U.S. Marshals Service.